Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the channel. I am Brian Lusk. Thanks for joining me tonight. We've got a pretty good amount of stuff here to go through. Some of it good news, some of it bad news, some of it I'll let you judge for yourself. We're going to jump right into things here. By the way, thank you. I already see Lucille has joined us today. And as you get in, please go ahead and chime in. Let me know that you're here and any questions you might have. And I'll see if I can get something going for you for getting an answer for you. We'll start off with this information that's coming from the German defense minister. Russia is already producing more arms and military equipment than it needs for its war against Ukraine, and it's filling its weapons warehouses. Now, this, I suspect, would be mostly possible just because of North Korea and Iran providing quantities of weapons to Russia. That said, it looks like they have actually been getting their economy entirely on a war footing. And let me tell you the real concern from Russia's perspective. If they get into a war economy mode, the end of war will be the end of their economy because they don't have the baseline capabilities in their economy to be able to sustain a peacetime economy once they've converted over. Now, they do warn that just because they're putting stuff into warehouses does not mean that we should be thinking they're stockpiling it for a rainy day. No, in fact, they believe they have other plans in mind. And this does put Ukraine at a disadvantage. If Russia is not suffering for shells or equipment, they're not going to have any compunction with actually using that on the battlefield, a situation they're already experiencing right now. Ukraine may have a large tranche of weapons coming in, but that does not mean that it's going to be all roses and song for Ukraine, because even once those weapons arrive, it is expected they will still be at a significant deficit compared to Russia. The chief of defense for Norway, Erik Kristoffersen, stated that the Russian armed forces are improving at a faster rate than expected. General Kristoffersen believes that the Russian Federation has basically moved into a war economy and is now capable of producing weapons at a higher rate than in 2023. The modernized or the rebuilt Russian force is closer to us now than I would say 1 year ago, based also on what they are receiving from Iran, from North Korea, and how they have been able to basically not have sanctions have the effect that I expected them to have had you asked me last year, he said. They're also learning. They're paying attention to the lessons they're receiving on the battlefield and adapting. The one advantage they have is that they don't have the weight of a like a democracy or a republic that has a lot more, shall we say, institutional momentum. They don't exactly tap dance well because they've got to get these things through the public review process, the legislative process. Whereas over in Russia, Putin says it, they do it. There is no delay except for getting Putin properly informed and able to give the proper orders. And that's one of I hate to call it an advantage, but it does mean that they are not bogged down by that level of administration. Thankfully for Ukraine, the amount of graft and bribes and chicanery going on over in Russia is so vast that even with them being able to go into a war economy, it may not be as effective as it could be at all. Now, Ukraine, as General Kristoffersen said, has done some amazing things, including, even though they've had 6 months of short weapons, they have still managed to do more on the Black Sea. They've managed to stabilize many parts of the front. There are some challenges right now, especially in certain areas where Ukraine is having to fall back and trade territory for time. And while the Russians may be paying for that in blood, it still means the loss of that territory. Territory that will eventually have to be bought back with Ukrainian blood. So that's the overall situation as far as Russia's production goes. It looks like they're on a war footing now, and they're able to produce more than they're using. And the 6 months Ukraine didn't receive that aid are going to really be a big pain for them, a pain point for them for some time. Russia did veto a vote on a nuclear weapons in space proposal. They complained about it being potentially beneficial to the United States, and so they eventually put out their own version of it. But the truth is that the no matter how you look at it, the Russians don't want to have that prohibition in place, even though they've already got other treaties and things that are supposed to prevent them from doing so. The weaponization of space is already against various bits of treaties and various things like that. So if they are planning to do their old nukes in space thing, they have already vetoed the legislation that would prevent it. 13 out of the 15 Security Council members did vote in favor of this legislation, with China abstaining and Russia being the opposition. So actually vetoing it outright. Now, this is from Astra, which is a Russian language news source, generally reliable and mostly neutral. The representatives of the Russian Foreign Ministry said that they would that the draft does not take into account the amendments proposed by Moscow, including clauses banning the deployment of any weapons in space, not just weapons of mass destruction, and guarantees of the non-use of force against space objects. Now, we've already had several countries demonstrate the ability to shoot down a satellite in space, including the United States, and as I recall, China's done it, and there's at least one other country in there. I just don't remember which one it is. So they were proposing that there's nothing that could be done to shoot down those items in space either. So take that for what you will. Understand that would also mean that if an intercontinental ballistic missile entered space during its flight, in theory, it would also be immune from being attacked, which would be silly. It's just a silly result of the proposal. U.S. Ambassador to the UN said that after the vote, Russia was undermining the global non-proliferation regime, and that this was not the first time this had happened. She did note that China's position shows reluctance on their part to maintain global security in an effort to please its partner, Russia. By the way, Jerry, glad to see you as well. Thank you for jumping on board. Moving on from there, this article about General Syrski was really interesting. It talked a lot about his history and his background, talking about the changes in the overall situation on the front lines, and how his experience in particular is particularly relevant right now. Syrski's old enough that he may have participated in the not necessarily in the invasion, but part of the Russian operations in Afghanistan. And therefore, he would be well familiar with Russia's capabilities and in their doctrine overall, their military doctrine. But Syrski is not Zaluzny. Zaluzny was very much a man that was able to take disparate and questionable pieces, piece them together, and make them into a fighting force. He had skills and abilities in that. Now Ukraine has managed to get through that hump. They've gotten to this new stage of warfare. And Syrski has already, as they say, made some military history here. He commands the first military ever that is not just waging a conventional ground war with drones, but is also fighting organization that has turned robot aircraft carrying explosives into the main weapon used to kill and wound the enemy and destroy his equipment. While artillery still is the large part of the battlefield deaths, and drones and drone-like equipment is accounting for at least a third of the losses on the battlefield. In fact, 2/3 of the Russian tanks lost to Russia were put out of action by drones in recent months. So this is a real sea change in how the war is being fought right now. Of course, Syrski also has a hand tied behind his back because he's not had the aid from the U.S. He's not had the support that he would need with the weapons and equipment to be able to perform in this way. So he has had to deal with a different type of fighting, one that rather than looking for opportunities to advance, though they are doing that, what they're doing instead is they're trading territory for basically enemy combat injuries and casualties. So by making, yes, they will have to fall back a little at a time, but each time they fall back, they leave behind hundreds, if not thousands, of dead Russians and dead equipment and all that stuff while taking minimal losses themselves. It's a tough bit of fighting right here, and one that he is hoping to carry out in a way to allow some of his units that have been on the lines for 2 years to be able to rotate them out, get them the rest and recuperation they need, reform some of their units, etc. Another thing that's been really interesting is the discipline that Sersky has been putting into his units. For instance, a lot of the units were formed around political reasons, not so much that they were incapable, but that there was a charismatic or interesting leader that took control of that unit and was using the marketing thereof to kind of advance that unit. But Sersky doesn't play that game. If there's a unit, he doesn't just change the commander. And if there's a unit that's a problem in some way, if they're undisciplined, unable to carry out their tasks, he instead disbands the whole unit and distributes them amongst other units, forms new units as needed. Hi, Paul. Glad to see you here, as always. We're talking about General Sersky here for a bit. So they actually provide an example of this happening here. According to reports first published by the major Ukrainian news magazine Ukrainska Pravda in early April, portions of the 67th Brigade, a unit formed mostly from politically connected fighters from the nationalist Right Sector group, abandoned positions in the Chasiv Yar sector under heavy Russian pressure. This posed Sersky and his staff with a typical AFU command problem. By AFU common practice, neither the soldiers nor commanders would be held accountable because they were all patriotic volunteers, and they're chronically short of troops. Confronting politically influential volunteers in a way Zaluzny never did, Sersky dissolved the brigade without further ado. In peacetime, this might have caused protests in the capital. But here in war, the unit was disbanded and the war went on. As the Russian military observers are saying, they're reporting that the armed forces of Ukraine they are now facing seem laser focused on waiting for the right moment to pile up Russian bodies and cares less about holding ground. The pro-Kremlin mill blogger Vault 8 in April 14th post, citing combat information from the front, wrote, The Ukrainians leave a position, then they start hitting it with everything possible. Between battles, they don't shoot much at all. And that gives the impression they have nothing to shoot with. But if we come out and attack one of their positions, everything pours down, from 120mm mortars to 155mm howitzers and mini FPV drones, from 2 to 4 attacks for each of our soldiers to get a sure kill. And when the Ukrainians observe us trying to pull back, they counterattack immediately to recover what they lost. So this is Sersky's way of fighting this war. It's for a different set of circumstances. The lack of using up their weapons in just general combat where they don't have to, that means that they're saving their ammunition for the right time. They are watching for the opportunities and they're pouncing. And all this is how Sersky has arranged their military units to work as. Now, if Ukraine had the superiority in total weapons and artillery and all this kind of stuff, the situation would be vastly different. But when you don't have that superiority, you have to use your materiel at just the right time for maximum effect. So overall, this is a kind of how Sersky works. And it's interesting to watch. I am not going to claim to be an expert on either his thinking or military thinking in general, but this is how he works. They note that Sersky never used the word victory, not even once. That's because he's looking at the situation as it is, and he'll worry about the victory when it's time. Right now, he's fighting a defensive war until they're able to find the opportunities to advance. Now for news out of Ukraine itself. The Russian army fired at three Ukrezalinskaya facilities. This is their, I believe, their rail provider over there. In Donetsk region, Russian troops struck the village of Udachny, and three railway workers died, four were injured. They also attacked a railway station in Balaklia in Kharkiv region, where people were in the cars. Three employees were injured. And a morning strike on Smila in Cherkasy region also damaged the railway itself. We mentioned in the previous video that the Russians were potentially going to start targeting rail infrastructure, transportation hubs, logistics centers, etc., instead of so many civilian objects. I don't think that's going to stop them from targeting apartment buildings, but it might change their overall effectiveness if they do. The shortage of personnel in Ukrainian labor markets has increased significantly since last year. 74% of companies surveyed in Ukraine are experiencing a personnel shortage. This is the challenge of trying to keep a war going while also trying to run a country. And a report states that the number of people fleeing Ukraine grew exponentially after the Russian military started to target the country's energy infrastructure in October 2022. As long as there is relevant infrastructure for people to be able to cook their food, heat their homes, and they aren't in immediate dire risk, the odds are they're going to stay. It's human nature, really, kind of stay as long as you think you've got the necessary things to stay alive. Once the Russians started attacking that infrastructure directly, the power infrastructure, the gas and oil infrastructure, the people started to leave because they were no longer sure they could handle the situation. I believe that this is part of the ongoing challenge that Ukraine's going to have, and a lot of what we're seeing in the passport section, which we'll be talking about a bit here, is response to this situation. Ukraine's Minister of Agrarian Policy, Mykola Solsky, has resigned. He's been accused of embezzling state land worth 291 million hryvnias, and attempting to seize another parcel of land worth 190 million hryvnias. He is persona non grata these days, and we did mention him briefly in the previous video. Just understand that now he has resigned on top of it. Over in Russia, 3 tanks with petroleum products are burning on the Krasnoyarsk highway in Omsk. Preliminarily, the fire was 500 square meters, nobody injured, but that's 600 liters in total of fuel products or petroleum products, with the firefighters working to extinguish the fire. Moving over to the Institute for the Study of War for just a minute, I wanted to give an update on the information that came out yesterday on Maria Lvova-Belova, claiming that the Ukrainians and the Russians had gotten together for the first time to negotiate about the status of children. ISW points out that this is a deliberate misrepresentation, that they had negotiated these things before, and this is not a first time. So just want to give that update right there. Same information there. I have a reason for bringing this up, and I can't remember what it is. Bear with me a second. Oh, there we go. This is the deputy defense minister that was arrested for taking a bribe that was too big to miss. And it looks like he fell out of favor with Vladimir Putin, it was clear he was known to be taking these bribes previously. Now he has been ordered dismissed from his position and had his assets seized, according to TASS, the state-run media outlet. Ukrainian troops are reporting that Russians have managed to double their drones on the front lines over the past 3 months. This is, again, Russia showing their intentions to go to a wartime economy. Something that just kind of want to point out here, Sevastopol Bay, they've got a smoke screen over it as of earlier today. No report of any exact attacks on Sevastopol itself, but there was a massive missile attack on Crimea overnight. And I haven't gotten any good reports on anything specifically being hit. My understanding is that it wasn't actually missiles. It was actually dummies or decoy drones or decoy missiles, and there was a whole bunch of NATO reconnaissance planes monitoring the situation in Crimea as these decoys went over, probably mapping out what's left of Russia's air defenses in Crimea. From journalist Jason J. Smart, Putin has never stated that his objectives have changed. He wishes to capture Kyiv. Just look at what the Russian dictator is saying. It is all of Ukraine or nothing. There was an attack on the Novolipetsky metallurgical plant where 2 oxygen units stopped operating and the building itself was partially destroyed. Here's video of the consequences of that attack. The Russians always claim that they shot down all the drones successfully, and again, it always amazes me how many critical infrastructure objects are impacted and damaged by shot down bits of drone. Another video of the petroleum products that were caught on fire in Omsk, Russia. This gives you a little bit more of a video here. You can kind of see some of the action going on there. Let's go ahead and move on to the international front for a bit, and we've got some stuff to cover here. Moldovan authorities filed a criminal case against Yevgenia Gutsul, the Kremlin-affiliated governor of the pro-Russian Moldovan Autonomous Region of Gagauzia, for campaign finance violations as Moldovan officials continue to warn about Russia's threat to Moldova. The Moldovan media reported that there was a criminal investigation into this, and that was completed with Gutsul's connections with the Shore Party. This is a sanctioned party that's pro-Kremlin, that is basically not allowed to operate, and they filed a criminal case against Gutsul on 2 counts of knowingly accepting financial support from an organized criminal group. So, as always, Russian actions bring Russian corruption along with them, and that corruption is what's catching these people in the Moldovan net. Russia's really trying to disrupt things in Moldova. They want even more chaos going on in Europe. And in Europe, any chaos going on in Europe is less chaos going on for Russia itself. President Zelensky struck a conciliatory tone, stating that Ukraine hopes to continue cooperation with the United States regardless of election results. That would be referring to the presidential election, where things are still up in the air. A Russian spy in Poland was sentenced to 2.5 years in jail. He was accused of espionage on behalf of Russia for some time before that, actually. The next round of EU sanctions against Russia is expected to target Russia's shadow fleet of oil tankers and other cargo ships carrying North Korean military equipment to Russia. Well, we got a couple of things about this. In fact, I'm going to quickly divert into that in a moment here. The Shadow Fleet is the biggest problem child for the West in successfully carrying out sanctions. These are ships that may, in fact, be not necessarily flagged Russian, but they're carrying Russian products and material or things to Russia without necessarily declaring them openly, and there's issues along those lines. Let's go ahead and move over here. According to the Yonhap News Agency, a ship linked to North Korean arms shipments to Russia is moored in China. Now, that's interesting by itself. Even more interesting is the additional context that the Kyiv Independent provided. A North Korean registered cargo ship implicated in the illicit transfer of arms to Russia has been docked at a Chinese port for months. The initial report made it sound like that it was just recently done. Whereas this one says, no, it's been docked there for months. But that still shows that the Chinese are, as subtly as they can, trying to support Russia in this. And that tells you where their loyalties truly are. Of course, from China's perspective, Russia's a small thing. No matter how you slice it, they just don't have the economy or the capabilities to truly oppose China at this point in time. But by just even tacitly allowing this illicit ship here to stay docked in their ports, they're supporting Russia. Warsaw has put out some reassurances that it has no territorial claims to Ukraine, unlike the Russians who say they have no intentions to invade. When Poland says it, it's a lot more likely to be true. President Macron is still continuing to try and seize the leadership in the European Union these days, saying that European countries may face major risks in the coming years, potentially weakening Europe. We must realize that our Europe today is mortal. It can die. And in that same vein, he says that for our security, Russia does not win the war of aggression it is waging in Ukraine. And he explains it's necessary to give substance to the reliable defense of the European continent. Does that mean we need a missile shield? He said. Perhaps. Is it by increasing our defense capabilities? And if so, how? Undoubtedly. This is why in the coming months I will be inviting all our partners to build this European defense initiative. Europe's going to have to step up to the plate and get serious about defending themselves. The United States has forwarded that China is backing Russia's invasion of Ukraine. China, for its part, declared itself to be neutral and has not been doing anything. But then, as soon as they say that they're truly neutral and the U.S. points out something they're doing, China says, no, that's just normal relations. You can't stop us from having normal relations with Russia. Shockingly, their normal relations involve selling technology or gunpowder components to Russia. So the U.S. is saying that China can no longer claim complete neutrality. From the Britain aid package the other day, there was a Ukrainian military expert who did some analysis on it. Britain is preparing Ukraine for naval operations, including a possible landing on Crimea. According to Reserve Colonel of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Roman Sviton, the new package of British assistance, which provides for the transfer of high-speed boats, indicates preparations for crossing the Dnieper and landing troops in Crimea. He emphasized that the boats can operate both on rivers and in the sea, covering the distance to Crimea. He also notes that Ukrainian intelligence was already operating in Crimea last year. That's just interesting to put forward there. So we talked a lot about the ground-launched small diameter bomb, or GLSDB, last year, and everyone was like, well, when's it going to show up? When's it going to show up? Turns out there may have been some issues with the GLSDB. And a lot of the reason that may have not have come so fast is because they were trying to resolve those issues. In particular, they say it's being proven largely ineffective in Ukraine because Russian GPS denial is preventing it from having proper guidance to its destination. And work on Romania's Mihel Cogălniciu, there we go, airbase, into one of, still expanding. They're turning it into one of the largest NATO bases in Europe. This shows where Romania's true heart lies at this point. They wouldn't be expanding this if they didn't think they were going to need it and need it soon. Let's take a quick trot over to Armenia. The Kremlin explicitly threatened Armenia if Armenia does not resume active engagement in the Russian-led Collective Security Treaty Organization, or CSTO, and resume its pro-Kremlin alignment. In fact, they kind of started talking to Azerbaijan, who's been the ones attacking Armenia, and so it looks like Russia's trying to buddy up to Azerbaijan. In fact, that kind of attitude seems to be pervasive as activists of the Russian community came to the Batask school after a conflict between an Azerbaijani schoolboy and a Russian teacher. She, the teacher, told the schoolboy his nation is nobody. And she went into a rant talking about how the teenager should not offend fifth graders, talking about Azerbaijan, that the Azerbaijani are nothing they are nobody. They have neither language nor a country, and that the Russian teacher boasts of a powerful country that opposes the United States. She said, without the Russians, you will be cut. So the Russians will go to protect, and you will sit on their neck. You live at our expense. This is the attitude the Russians have towards their vassal states. So watch out there because they're showing who they really are, and it's not a pretty picture. Now let's go ahead and talk about passports for a little bit. In particular, there was a report that, in fact, it's a law that went through that passports for military-aged men can no longer be renewed at foreign consulates. They have to be done in Ukraine itself. Lithuania says they may assist Ukraine in returning military-aged men, which is following Poland's lead in the matter. But Germany says that Ukrainians with terminated passports will be allowed to stay in Germany. And if they have a temporary residence permit or they need to get a new one, that even if they have expired, they can potentially get an extension without issue. Then this came out, and I'm going to give you an advance heads up. This is a mess, and I do not have good confirmations because there's denials flying. According to Russian source Novaya Gazeta, the foreign ministry may stop issuing documents to Russians abroad. A document about this was widely distributed to the media, including Astra, which is who I actually got it from. They showed a fragment of the document. They say that the document looked authentic, but however, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for Russia has stated that this is an outright lie. In fact, the Russian ministry denied the reports that it is preparing a ban on the issuance and replacement of Russian documents, in particular foreign passports, at embassies abroad. They said, if I can find it now. Well, okay, I'm going to back up a second here. Lawyers say that the termination of consular services abroad, an unclear legal situation has arisen. They talk about how they don't have really good information on this. Understand that when this war started, Russia lost, I believe it was about 1.5 million young men that did not want to go to war right off the bat. So if it's true that Russia is also refusing to issue documents at their consulates to military-age young men or that type of thing, then it's going to be a real kick for them too. They're going to have to return home and be prepared to fight. But the Ministry of Foreign Affairs says that order was in fact on fake letterhead, fake that was on letterhead for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in the end. So take your pick on what you believe in that one. Just understand that it's out there, and usually when Russia gives me a denial, I watch a few weeks, and a few weeks later, it's turned out to be true. Now we got the situation on the front lines. One of these, I'm going to call it up-armored, but they're basically sheds that are mounted to the top of tanks, bogged down in the mud over in some of the areas in Krasnohorivka. But this isn't a one-time thing. If you watch this video here, you'll see several of these basically shed arrangements on the top of Russian tanks. How effective these are? Well, I can't make that call, but I have seen reports that if the Ukrainians are seeing an up-armored shed wandering around the battlefield, they're not bothering to attack it with a drone. And instead, they're attacking the support vehicles like BMPs and other lighter vehicles. That said, this is not proof against things like 155 millimeter artillery shells. Yeah, the turtle tanks. That's a great word for it. So that's kind of, they're showing up in greater numbers now, is what I'm trying to say. The arrival of long-range ATACMS missiles in sufficient quantities will allow Ukrainian forces to degrade Russian logistics and threaten Russian airfields in deep rear areas. Although months of delay may have provided the Russian military time to offset the potential operational impact that ATACMS will afford Ukraine. And the Institute for the Study of War talks about this quite a bit, mentioning that with the lack of hardware showing up for a while, that even if Ukraine is able to strike an airfield in the occupied territories, they may not be able to follow up on that with ground assault or other weapons and equipment that will really make the advantage marked. Without that ability, they may find that the significance of having a significant number of ATACMS may not be as much as would have been capable. Let's jump into the map for a bit. There's a lot of changes going on. The biggest change here is west of Novobakhmativka. We can see here that the Russians appear to have basically marched into Solovyove. There we go. Without much issue, although my understanding is that there is plenty of fighting going on here. Ukrainians had already fallen back from Novobakhmativka, and of course, this is just south of Otsoratine, which is where the unit pulled back without having a proper relief in play. Okay, there we go. Up north of northwest of Avdiivka, there have been additional advances by Russian troops near Novokalinove. And you can see it's another one of these extension pseudopods where they're starting to move in ways that make me think that it's going to be easy to cut off. Now you can see that the situation I was mentioning here at Otsoratine, where it looked like they had that long, thin finger, has now expanded out where it's not going to be easy to cut off anymore. So that may be a situation that happens over here and allows them to flank around some of the defensive structures near Brdici and that area. In fact, you can see right here, Brdici is part of the main defensive line that they are obviously trying to flank around. And there's a Krasnohorivka here. Let's take a look here. Moving over to north of Marinka or west of Donetsk here, the Russians have also managed to move forward in Krasnohorivka, just taking some more of the open territory and a few buildings in this area here. That's everything from the deep state map, but there are some other details that'll be important to kind of understand the context. Just so we know what the Russians have captured in Solovyove, there we go. This is, you can see the already destroyed territory and buildings. They've already flattened this town. So the defense there is, again, defending effectively flattened buildings. This is just showing a couple of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles leaving the village due to that attack. But then there's this one. I'll go ahead and start this over from the beginning here and mute the music. Russian fortifications on the left bank are being found and destroyed. So I know they're using drones for a lot of that, but I suspect they're using some other material as well, some of the things that are showing up on the front lines. This allowed the Ukrainians to, of course, advance towards Kozachi-Liheri, and it may indicate that this is where they think they have enough of an advantage to be able to actually degrade and destroy Russian forces in the Krinky area on the left bank of the Dnieper River. The fact that they've got so many of these items being targeted and destroyed is really what makes me think there's something more going on there than meets the eye. Then this is the opposite direction here for most of the things we're talking about. This is Seversk Verkhonkamianka. This is where there's actually been an advance by Ukrainian forces. Now, let me pull up the deep state map in this area to give you some context here. We're over here on the east side. This area is mostly been, I wouldn't say calm, but not much changes except for in the Serbianki forestry area right here. This is also south of the Turney area where the Russians had attempted another advance about 2 weeks ago and have basically been locked back to a standstill. But if we come over here to just west of Verkhonkamianka, there we go, we find that even though the deep state map hasn't been updated, the Ukrainians have managed to push into this elevated area over here on the south, and therefore potentially take a slightly better position than they had before. It's not a big change. You can see this is a teeny tiny little bit of territory. In fact, I'd have to zoom in this map about to here, and it would be about in this area right here. But at least it's indicating that the Ukrainians, when they believe they have the opportunity, they are taking advantage of it and moving forward. The Russians did hoist their flag in, let's see, Solovyove. This is just showing that they believe they have the control of the settlement. I've seen further reports that Ukrainian resistance is still there. Just understand that at this point, the Russians are in the eastern part of Slovyove and may, in fact, take the entire village in short order here. In Krasnohorivka, the situation for the Ukrainian troops is deteriorating inside the town, with the Russian forces managing to grab a foothold in the local materials factory. And this is according to geolocated footage. As Null Report states, this situation doesn't look good. So we have a bit of a mixed bag. We've got indications of Ukraine advancing in Krinky and advancing in that one little area up there, but the Russians are continuing to push forward as the Ukrainians fall back. Even though they're paying for it with a great deal of losses, the Russians are still taking that territory. And at this point, they still have the stuff to do it. And that's everything on the front. Oh, not everything. I forgot about this here. Let's get over to this. Robbie mentioned the other day that he had heard that there was more activity in Sumy, and I had seen a few things but had nothing confirmed. However, Russian forces used a KAB guided bomb to hit infrastructure in the city of Sumy on April 25th. There was damage and casualties, though they were still being clarified as of this post. In addition, in the Sumy region, border guards engaged in a battle with a Russian reconnaissance and sabotage group, which numbered more than 10 people. Now, this is unusual because most of those sabotage groups are a couple of guys, 4, maybe 6 if it's a really big one. Seeing more than 10 people gathered as an individual sabotage group may indicate that the Russians are pushing in this area. Will it become more? Not sure, but the sabotage group ended up retreating. The report on that battle is an ambush with more than a dozen saboteurs was discovered by the border guards in one of the directions. A shooting battle ensued. To reinforce the reserves of the units of the State Border Service and the Defense Forces, artillery and mortar units were brought in. As a result of this collision or this battle, the Russian soldiers retreated. And the overall report from Sumy is that the intensity of these sabotage groups has increased, with the Russian military carrying out 3 shellings of the border areas and settlements of the Sumy region. So things are heating up in Sumy. If you want to kind of know where that's at, let me pull a map here and get that kind of clarified for you. This is the Sumy region right here. And you can see here, it's right on the Russian border. The Ukrainians have been hitting Bryansk, Kursk, and Belgorod oblasts repeatedly with drones, and the Russians have been building up troops kind of in this area in general, and it looks like they're finally starting to make a move in this area. We're going to be watching it very closely because if that happens, it's going to be yet another front that Ukraine's going to have to deal with. And I only have one interesting extra for today. This is just talking about the Russian Mad Max giant metal enclosures that are being installed on their armored vehicles. In this case, one of the Akhmat armored vehicles. Well, yes, it can stop a drone. You'll note that there's about a half meter, or about 1.5 to 2 feet of clearance on the bottom of the cage that something could sneak under. It's not proof against mines. This is entirely for the purpose of preventing drones from directly attacking the vehicle. But there are some weaknesses. There's only one way out, and it's a gate at the back of the vehicle. So if the Russians have to bail out of the vehicle, they've got to bail out through this gate in order to escape. So if something gets through, an artillery shell, for instance, it's a death trap. But overall, the overall situation with these is just the Russians are continuing to up-armor their stuff with every bit of chicken wire they can find. And that's everything for today. I don't have anything extra to add on that. So I do appreciate you guys being here. It's a relatively short report today. That's not to belittle any of the amazing things going on. We've just had so much going on over the last few days that we finally had a day that was just a little bit less. And that's all there is to it. That doesn't mean, again, that there isn't plenty of fighting going on. There is tons of fighting going on all across the fronts. And even some areas have been stabilized quite a bit. Others are still falling apart, and the situation continues to be troublesome for Ukraine at the least. Thanks again for joining me. I appreciate you guys being here. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.